Hi, thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about data conversions and extracts on a very high level. This is a very in-depth, complex process, and each unique situation should be treated as such. For those of you who were able to join us a couple of weeks back, Rhonda Young did take us through the process of analyzing and the decision-making process that should be taken into account when looking at possibly going to another application or possibly pulling up an application for the first time. We're going to take it a step further and take a look at the process to extract and put the data into a new version or joining practices. So obviously the first part of this process is determining what goals and what the provider's requirements are going to be. Some of the main key areas to take a look at is you want to make sure, of course, that the information within the old application is brought over to the new one and that specific data points are addressed. This may or may not be the entire application. One of the biggest misconceptions when going through a conversion process is that you're going to just take all of the information from one application and dump it into a new one. And there's some issues with that process that we're going to talk a little bit about, and so that may not be the best approach to actually take. We want to make sure that through this process and while going live on the new application, that we're able to maintain providers' productivity. And of course, probably the most important is maintaining patient safety during this time. And we want to keep in mind one of the reasons that we're going to be transitioning and making sure that we're actually driving utilization and adoption of the new EHR system. The very first part of the process, of course, is defining scope, clearly outlining what will be converted and how. We encourage you to engage both clinical people in this process as well as business office leadership in determining the scope, as they will have very different motivations. Then you need to take a look at each data element that will be converted and how it can be converted, what the information sits in the one application and how it will then convert over to the new application and display can have a dramatic effect on the fit of extract, as well as if the information even has a place to go within the new application. Determine how far back you will pull data. You may have been on the old application for a very long period of time, and so it may not be practical or even pragmatic to pull data back from the beginning of time. We also see practices change and evolve quite a bit over the years. So as they become more sophisticated with the application, the old data within the system may not be something they want brought over into the new one. Also determine what patients will be converted. You might want to discuss things like deceased patients or patients that have no longer been in the practice for multiple years, whether it is worth the effort and time required in pulling all those patients over. And then once these data elements and these patients items have been determined, you want to make sure that you have consensus within the organization and understanding of the scope and that everybody is engaged in this process. So the first part of the process is understanding the data source and destination of information. This is a very complex subject and will vary depending on the legacy EHR and the new EHR. Depending on how the information is stored, it may be displayed as in different formats within different applications. And pulling it over from one EHR to another does not mean a direct one-to-one mapping. So a provider might have seen lab results in one format in one application, pulling it over to another one where possibly it's more condensed. They may not see the same type of information or in the same format. This may lead to modifications in workflow or changes of how the information has been brought over as a result. It should also be taken into account whether there's information or a source for where the information is going to go within the new application. Unfortunately, there is no single source of requirements for information within EHR. So you can have information you were able to put in one application and no longer a source to put it within the new one. These decisions should not only be included on a clinical level, including providers, understanding where the information is going to and what is available, but also technical resources and analyzing what format the information is displayed in. It's also important to take a look at what the process will be to extract and convert the data, be it flat file, HL7, CCDs. Each one of these have different impacts on the end users and may require manual entry process as a result. A period of time should be taken to actually validate the quality of data in the legacy system. As I mentioned before, the longer you're on an EHR, the more sophisticated providers do become. Depending on the type of conversion that you are performing, it makes a dramatic difference if you are going from one system into a brand new, completely clean system, possibly merging multiple practices together. And an initial time should be taken to see what repercussions of these will have. If you're going from a multiple practices into one, will there be patient overlap? And if so, what will be the primary source of information for any discrepancies? It should also be discussed whether time will be spent to validate the information to make sure that the information coming over to the new system is clean and accurate. These should be very candid conversations and should always include key stakeholders. Consideration of stuff like patient safety risks should be taken into account for this process because the new system will hold all data and be considered the true existing data source. And after a period of time, providers may not have the old system to go back to and reference where the information came from. Then, of course, we get to the actual data mapping. So figuring out where the information is coming from and where it's going to. You should keep a detailed requirements list for this. This can be extremely important, of course, in the validation process, but during the go-live process where providers are getting used to the new system, it is often expressed that information is missing, and through a detailed requirements list of what the information is being converted to, this can greatly help to determine if the information is actually missing or the provider is just not looking in the right place. Of course, then we get to the testing and validation period. Once the information has been mapped, you should import into a non-production environment first. We all know, of course, that it will need to get into the production environment, but an initial reviewing of the information is absolutely critical. During this phase, we do encourage providers to select a key set of patients through this process, ones that they're familiar with their charts, and include more than one provider or subject matter expert in this process. The reason for this and the advantage to it once the data has been imported into this non-production environment, the providers are going to quickly notice what information that they are not seeing, and that will greatly help with the validation process. In addition to these providers or subject matter expert teams, validation should also be performed by the IT conversion team as well, making sure that the information comes over with no fails. Once we've tested that and it's been successful both from the technical aspect as well as the provider sign-off, a planned production conversion can take place. Key considerations should be put into the plan for the timing of the production conversion. How far back you will go will have a dramatic impact on how long it will take to convert the data. And therefore, we do encourage people to consider what we call a catch-up conversion or incremental conversions. The reason for this is depending how long you were on the old system, it may take multiple hours to possibly days to pull in all the information. So a conversion over a weekend may not be possible. Having a clear plan of how far back and which patients will be included in possibly incremental loads can very much help with making a strategic approach to catching up the new system with all the patient information you plan to bring over. This can be done various ways. We've often seen it based off of schedules, patients seen within the past 6 months, or possibly patients seen within the past year, and then these catch-up conversions can be performed on incremental timelines until all the data that you want to bring over to the new system has been pulled in. You want to do a final test of the files and any cleanups that you found as issues from the initial testing load prior to the production conversion. And then once the conversion has taken place, there should be a plan in place to archive or remove any patients from the old system once the conversion is complete. That is a very high-level conversion process. As I mentioned at the very beginning, each conversion is unique depending on what application you are starting from and, of course, where you're going. If there are going to be multiple practices merged together, if there's any duplication of information across the EHRs. So it is absolutely vital when adapting a new system and converting over information to follow very strategic steps in the data validation process prior to conversion. The longer you have been on the old system, the more chances for needing data cleanup to occur will be present. And it's important to do very thorough data evaluation before the integration happens. And it's extremely important to include the practices and providers being involved in this process. They are the kind of the frontline people, and therefore are going to be dramatically affected by this process. The ways to help ensure success with the conversion is including them in not only the decision-making process, but having a clear communication of what information will be converted, how it will be converted, and where it will be converted to will greatly affect the success of a go-live. Thank you all for joining me here today. I appreciate you allowing me to kind of walk through a very high-level data conversion and the steps that you should take and considerations you should take into account when going from a legacy system into a new application. If you have any questions specific to your unique situation, please feel free to email us or give us a call. We'd be happy to walk through and get you started on a clean path for your EHR conversion.